So we're moving on to our next item, 9.4, the California State Audit Report. Presentation this evening will be done by Rose Ramos and Elaine Howell. We want to thank Ms. Howell for her time and the time and effort of their team in preparing for this evening, in conducting the thorough analysis, and in sharing your findings.
And I'm just simply introducing Ms. Elaine Howell to present the findings of the report.
Anne?
I think the clicker is right here. If I can figure out how to use it. Thank you, President Ryan and members of the board. For the record, my name's Elaine Howell. I'm the California State Auditor. With me is Nick Kalitzos. Nick was the audit manager on the particular project we're going to talk about tonight. And to his left is Nathan Briley. Nathan was the audit supervisor responsible for supervising the audit team and conducting the audit work. We have a few slides. There are some graphics that are excerpts from the audit report, and really will highlight the key issues that we identified in the audit, a lot of what has been discussed tonight about the fiscal situation that the district is in, and certainly the fiscal situation the district is heading towards, which is insolvency. I'm going to talk a little bit on the first slide. This is a graphic that is in the audit report that looks at the future, looks at the past, using audited financial statements. Information that has been verified by an auditor. This is actual information. Here's your revenues coming in, here's your expenditures going out. There has been a structural deficit for the district for many years, and as this slide shows, the general fund, essentially the reserves, the general fund balance has declined significantly in the last several years. And again, that's based on audited financial statements. And then as you can see on the graphic, there's projections for fiscal years 19-20, the year we're in, 2021 and 21-22, that my staff, using audited financial statements, looking at past expenditures, past revenues, figuring out what would the projection look like and what is that going to do to the general fund balance. And as you can see, and as I'm sure it has been shared with you and the public, is the district is heading towards insolvency. In the past 3 years, there has been a significant decline in the general fund balance. It went from about almost 98 million down to about 70 million. So again, it is a serious decline, and there needs to be some decision making. I know it's very difficult decision making. I've been listening to the comments by various individuals in the audience, and I appreciate all the different perspectives, but the fact is this district is in trouble and there need to be some difficult decisions made to try to get you out of that or to avoid insolvency. You certainly, I would assume, want to avoid state takeover. So the next slide is showing you the structural deficit that the district has been suffering from, in my terms, since 16-17. As you can see, and I don't know how easy it is for the audience, but the expenditure line is the dark blue line, and most of those years, your expenditures have consistently exceeded your revenues coming in. Mm-hmm. And again, the shaded part, my staff put together a projection showing that that gap is getting even wider when you project out. And that's why, reaching the conclusion on the previous slide, the district is heading towards insolvency. Write it down. The projections, and I heard someone mention that currently the general fund balance is about $70 million. Mm-hmm. If you look at the projections from fiscal years 19-20, the year we're in, through 21-22, the projection is that expenditures will exceed revenues by $77 million. So even if you used every single dollar in your reserve, you're going to run out of money. The structural deficit is just too significant. And again, difficult decisions that need to be made. When we looked at the expenditures, we wanted to look at the composition of those expenditures. 80% of the expenditures of the district are for salaries and benefits. It's similar to any organization. Expenditures in my office, a vast majority of it is my staff. That's the biggest resource, the most important resource to the state auditor's office. Incredibly important resource to the district and to the students in this district are the teachers and the other staff. But 80% of the costs this district incurs those expenditures are salaries and benefits. So clearly that has to be an area that district has to take a look at. Other drivers are special education costs, and I appreciate the comments from one of the previous presenters in providing public comment. It absolutely is essential that the district uses competitive bidding for a variety of different contracts. But again, that is not a significant amount of money where you are going to find significant savings in doing that. It's good practice, it's best practice. You need to competitively bid to the extent you can, particularly with certain special education services. And other contracts that you enter into. But again, that's a smaller portion of your budget. And when you're facing a significant deficit, as we've talked about, and a large structural deficit, you've got to look where there's significant expenditures, and that, again, that's salaries and benefits. I know there's been concern and questions about some of the work that we've included in the audit report with respect to compensation. And we looked at total compensation on average, comparing this district with districts in the region. And consistently, total compensation, not salaries, but total compensation from fiscal year 13-14 through the most recent fiscal year, the total compensation is the highest in this district. Most of that in earlier years was driven by the health benefits. And as President Ryan and others mentioned, there have been concerns raised by other entities that have looked at district finances about the health care benefits. Health care benefits are important to employees. Believe me, I agree with that. But they have to be affordable to the district. So we looked at and we wanted to see what's the comparison of the health benefits that are provided by employees of this district compared to other districts in the region. Again, similar school districts, Twin Rivers, Stockton, San Juan Unified, Elk Grove. And we saw that the benefits that are provided by this district are much more generous and therefore much more expensive than all of those other districts. Most of those other districts provide health care benefits, absolutely, but they are significantly, well, not significantly, they are different than the district here in Sacramento. And I have another graphic that will go through some of that. So the other issue that we discuss in the audit report, and we created a graphic for it, wasn't in the audit report, but it's based on information in the audit. So there are a variety of suggestions that the Sacramento City Teachers Association has come up with. We wanted to look at those. We wanted to see, okay, are these viable solutions, potential solutions for the district? And the concern we have is 2 of those proposals actually would increase costs by close to $36 million, and the district cannot afford to do that. That would be rescinding layoffs of certain individuals and then lowering class sizes by hiring more and more teachers. And again, we wouldn't disagree that smaller class sizes are beneficial to students, but at this point in time, the district cannot afford to do that. So those 2, the fiscal impact you can see on the graphic, the top 2 lines, rescinding 2019 layoffs and lowering class sizes. That's going to increase costs for the district. But they did have some other suggestions as far as reducing contributions towards retiree health care. So this would save about $7 million over the 3 years. The savings would diminish over time because if you're contributing less towards a liability, something that you owe, like having a credit card, if you're contributing less towards that, your unfunded liability is going to continue to grow. You're going to ultimately have to pay more in the future. So it is not necessarily the best solution. It is a small dollar amount. Again, we're looking at $27 million, $11 million in 1 year and $16 million in a subsequent year. There was also a suggestion to reduce administrator pay by 20%. We looked at that. Overall, it would be about $3 million, but many of those administrators are part of a bargaining union or bargaining group. So we took those out and we said, okay, if you had the ability just to cut the salaries of administrators who are not part of collective bargaining, it would drop down to about $1 million in ongoing savings. Not a significant amount. And then the last was reducing contract expenditures. And again, I think the suggestion to do as much competitive bidding as you can is a great suggestion. But we looked at those contracts, and many of those contracts are for essential services. for electricity, for power, just to keep the lights on in the classroom. You can't necessarily reduce those costs. So there were a lot of those contracts where it was not feasible to find cost savings in those particular expenditures. Now, the flip side, we looked at Sac City Unified School District's proposal, and it was specifically looking at the healthcare. And as you can see on the slide, lowering the cost for the plan for employee plans, and then 75% of the lowest cost plan. And that would generate $16 million in ongoing savings, significant amount that could be put towards, reducing that deficit. We came up with some additional proposals, and we don't have the simple solution, and we wanted to give a laundry list of various options that the district could consider. And that's on our last slide. So there's a variety of things. The ones that were highlighted, we added those together to come up with $27 million. But these clearly are just options that we wanted to put out there for the district to consider. The first highlighted one, cut all salaries, not just teachers, cut everybody's salary 2%. That will generate some savings. The middle section is looking at retiree health benefits. This is requiring individuals to contribute towards retiree health benefits. This is something that the state of California recently did under Governor Brown, where state employees now have to contribute a percentage of their salary towards post-employment benefits. So health benefits, after I retire someday, I will receive health benefits, but I contribute towards that as a state employee now. It comes out of my paycheck. It's a recent change in the state of California. I think it was a smart thing for the state of California to do, and I think it's something that this district and other districts in the state really need to seriously consider to be able to hopefully work towards funding those liabilities that are there and will be there in the future. The next column of potential changes to healthcare benefits. Again, there's options there. We didn't highlight either one of those. We laid them out there as potential options. And then we dropped down to changes affecting all employees rather than just teachers. The potential where we didn't highlight anything was specific to teachers. But we said, okay, let's look at healthcare benefits for all employees. And as we highlighted on the graphic, if you cap the payment at 90%, not a huge cut, but if you cap it at 90%, you're saving $14 million, a significant savings. So if you add those three items that we highlight in this graphic together, you're coming up with that about $27 million in savings. Now, that's not the end. You've got to continue to be, those are the choices. If there are other choices, there has to be due diligence moving forward for this district. You've got to deal with the crisis that you're in right now, and I believe it's a crisis because it's a structural deficit. It has been going on for a long time, and time is, of the essence. If the projections like we have are demonstrating that the district is going to be insolvent in October of 2021, things need to happen quickly to avoid that. So overall, that's the audit report. Again, I have my experts here. I know there were some questions. I wanted to address the question related to the compensation, some of the information we have in the audit report related to total compensation for teachers in SAC Unified compared to other districts in the region. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions, or do you have any?
Thank you, Ms. Howell. First, we're going to take public comments. Do we have any public comments on this item?
Yes, we have three. Marisol Aviña, Jim Cox, and Allison French.
Thank you. Oh, and Ms. Howell, if you'll just, perfect. Thank you so much.
Good evening, President Ryan, Superintendent Aguilar, board members, State Auditor. Thank you so much for the great work that you and your staff did on this audit. I'm here as a concerned community member, just again to support the recommendations that the State Auditor has made. Appreciate that you've created a pathway forward and information that we have known. Now it's confirmed again by yet another audit, and really urge all parties to come together to negotiate. We do not want to be taken over by the state. We really need to make tough decisions, as you have really stressed, and we want you to know that you have community members here that support you and really want to see the best outcome for our children. As you stated, President Ryan, early in the meeting, we need to make sure that we are keeping our kids front and center in these very difficult decisions. So really just want to urge everyone to come together and adopt some of the recommendations that have been made by the state auditor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We filled it out of the same card.
Okay, so we're combining 2 comments for 4 minutes, please.
Is it possible to turn this on?
Do we have someone who can help with the overhead? Okay, we have it up. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So maybe the auditors will address some of this, so my name is Jim Cox, and I'm a parent in the district. I also teach at Sac State, and I spent a lot of my career researching and studying government budgets, so my personal and professional interests have led me to follow the district situation closely. I'm concerned that the district is heading toward a disastrous imposition of a contract on the teachers that's going to lead to a long strike. And I think part of the reason is because the state auditor found that Sac City pays about $20,000 more in average total compensation than other districts. The problem is that the compensation numbers from the audit are not consistent with other data. As you probably know, the definitive source for teacher salary data in California comes from the J90 form that districts fill out in the spring. However, the J90 wasn't available in 1819 or 1920, the time the audit was done. So the state auditors estimated salary and health information from projected budgets from districts in the area. What they did was they simply took the amount, it seems what they did was to take the amount that in those categories and divide by the number of teachers. And they showed dramatic increases in compensation for 1819 and 1920. Fortunately, we can check these because since the audit happened, the J90 data has come out for 1819. And you can see it on this graphic that compares the results for the J90 data to the what the auditor found. It turns out the audit overestimated average teacher compensation by about $14,000 in 1819. And the best comparative data that we have is from 1819 J90, and it shows that average total compensation in Sacramento is about $97,000, which is about $3,000 to $4,000 more than Elk Grove. That's likely to go up a few $1,000s this year with changes to the salary schedule, but still not close to the $20,000 in the state audit. When I ran the numbers for the J90 for statewide for districts over 20,000 students, the average total compensation was about $98,000, which is $1,000 more than what Sacramento is paying. Now, it's possible you might argue, well, even though these are not consistent, since they calculated them the same way across districts, they might be the same. But there was a problem with the number in the status of labor agreements that they used to calculate average health care. And there was also $8.3 million in back pay included in this year's budget, which was used to calculate average salary for 1920. It is fair and appropriate for the district to compare compensation among other districts, but I hope there'll be careful scrutiny on these numbers. I also wonder why only teachers' compensation is being compared in this way. If we have to make cuts, everybody, including administrators, should have the same comparisons take place. The district's recent proposal to cap healthcare expenditures puts almost all of the cuts on teachers, and there's no mutual sacrifice. I hope the board will find a more balanced approach that will avoid not only a state takeover, but also a long labor conflict and strike. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cox. Our next public comment, Allison.
Hello. I do have some similar comments to Jim Cox, which is asking, I read here what you guys have used to perform the audit, and I don't understand the claims that the calculations were made on budgeted numbers so much as they were verified by budget numbers when I read the assessment of data reliability. So I'm hoping the audit team can address that. And then also I would be interested to know what districts or what criteria were used to select districts for comparison, because I heard Stockton mentioned, which I don't hear mentioned a lot in public dialogue. I heard San Juan. I often hear comparisons to Folsom and some other districts that are in our region, but might be said to be in a different economic strata than Sacramento as a whole, because Sacramento has, our students are like 70% low income. So what does that represent about our community? I don't understand why we would expect to be the highest paid here representative of our community. So, but the question for the auditors would be to talk a little bit more about the criteria that they used for comparison. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more. Kenya Martinez.
Ms. Martinez.
Hello, I just wanted to say a sobering comment. So I actually just did my taxes, and I figured out that the amount of compensation that I pay in healthcare is actually 26% of my salary. And I do not make nearly what the highest paid teacher or the lowest paid teacher in our district or the average teacher in our district makes. So for me and any parent who has a child attending school in this district, it is hard for me to look at this budget and justify as to why we would be in a budget crisis when many of our teachers who I value and I love teachers, I love educators, who are compensated so well in a district that is so poor. 76% of our students are living below the poverty line. They are getting free and reduced lunch. So I just wanted to make that statement, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Do we have any other public comments at this time?
No.
Okay. So we're going to open it up to board member questions and comments. Ms. Howell, if you wouldn't mind, since we've also had an online portal, and I know you've addressed through your presentation many of the questions that have come up consistently, but we heard again tonight, how were the comparisons done, the total compensation numbers arrived at? Can you please speak to those specific questions?
Sure, and I will ask my staff to assist with some of this, but there is a table in the audit report. And when we had access to the J90s, and they were available, we used that information in the table. And I'm going to pull the table because I want to make sure I get the years correct. So that was through fiscal years 13-14 through 17-18. The J90s are available. Mm-hmm. And the table consistently shows from all of those years, when you're looking at total compensation, you're considering salaries and benefits, SAC Unified had the highest total compensation. As Mr. Cox indicated, the J90s were not available for 18-19. So we had to use what was available at the time, looking at budgeted information. Budgeted salaries includes additional stipends, some other, I'll defer to staff, but there's other components of salary for a teacher that they receive that is in the budget. It doesn't end up in the J90. So when you see a comparison that Mr. Cox just showed showing budgeted numbers to J90s, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. What we were trying to demonstrate in this table is over time, in some cases, and you see earlier years, the teacher salaries in SAC Unified were lower than in other districts. But when we added in that health benefit, looked at total compensation for teachers in this district, it was consistently the highest across the board. Now let's talk about 18-19 and 19-20. Mm-hmm. Using the budgeted numbers, we used the budgeted numbers for all the other districts we compared. So those districts are going to be including the stipends. So we wanted to make sure we were comparing fairly this district to other districts. Now subsequent, the J90s have come out for 18-19, and staff did an analysis of the J90 for 18-19. And the answer is the same. The total compensation for teachers in this district is the highest of the districts we compared Sac City Unified to. And again, that was Stockton, San Juan Unified, Elk Grove, and Twin Rivers. Staff can explain a little bit. I mean, there's a variety of reasons and analyses that we go through when we're making a determination as to what districts we're going to compare a district to, or if we're auditing counties, when we're going to compare counties to others. But we did look at some of the information Mr. Cox provided to us. He left off a couple of school districts out of his analysis, and that changes some of the results. He's saying it was for space. With all due respect, it was not for space, because we added those back in, and they are comparable to Sacramento when you're comparing what happened with budgeted numbers in 1819 and how it compared to the J90s. If you add those other two school districts in, they're very similar to Sacramento as far as the difference in a budgeted amount versus the actual amount in a J90, where those stipends and et cetera. The bottom line is the conclusions, whether you're using a J90 or budgeted information, is the same. The total compensation for teachers in this district is the highest across all of the years we looked at. Now, with respect to the comment was made by the last public member, that's why we put options out there. We didn't want to just put options up there and say cut teacher salary, cut teachers benefits. We have cut all salaries, have teachers pay towards their retiree health, cap health benefits for all employees, not just for teachers. We wanted to make sure there were a variety of options that this district could consider in making, what are going to be difficult fiscal decisions. I know these will weigh on you. They will weigh on others who are involved in these decisions. That's what happens at the state level. It's difficult to have to go down this path, but the reality is there is a problem. But again, we tried to provide a variety of different options for the district to consider. So I don't know if my staff, you have anything you'd like to add?
If you could please speak to the regions that were selected as comparable, because I think that has also been a point of contention.
So, it's a very basic way that we determine the regions that we did the comparison against. We actually looked at a fact finding that the district did previously in its negotiations for its 2017 labor agreement. And we looked at the district submitted other school districts that thought were comparable to it. And the teachers union submitted districts that it thought were comparable to it. Of those that we included, all of them but Twin Rivers were on both lists. So we felt that with both parties felt that they were comparable, it would be something that would be fair for us to compare as well. And also in looking at them, they have similar demographic makeups to Sacramento City. We also added Twin Rivers to our list because we thought that it would also has a similar makeup of student population to Sacramento City.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Do we have board member questions and comments of the state auditor at this time? Board member Garcia, followed by board member Pritchett.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank you for being here at this late hour. I know this is not usually what you do. Once your office conducts an audit, you don't go to the school district. You generally present at the state level. So I want to thank you. I thought it was really important to have this conversation as publicly and as inclusively as possible so that we can begin to move forward. So thank you. Thank you. So I did submit probably like 30 questions, and I won't read them all, but I did want to talk a little bit about just some of your recommendations, and then I have some general comments. Some of your recommendations were that the board certify the district's ability to pay for a proposed collective bargaining agreement. And I just needed to maybe understand a little bit more what that process looks like, how a board goes about certifying when the information that we get are from our district staff.
So basically what we are envisioning is that under the current process, the chief business officer and the superintendent actually certify as to the affordability of a collective bargaining agreement. What we're doing is we extended that to include the board. Part of the reason why we wanted to do that is to expand the accountability in making these decisions. In terms of what it would look like, I mean, basically we would extend the certification to the members of the board, but given that you would have to rely on information that's presented by the district, we also included recommendations for the district to improve its budgeting practices, how it calculates projections. So when it's presenting the information to the board, it's including what are the assumptions, what data did you use, their methodology for calculating that information. And basically what we want to do is make sure the board has the tools it needs to make informed decisions, to ask the right questions related to these agreements. So in general, that's kind of how the recommendation would look like.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions so I can let my colleagues also ask some questions. There was, in your report, you have that districts under receivership that have filed for bankruptcy, essentially, have had administrators who have voided the collective bargaining agreements. How many did you find that have actually done that?
So the one that we're aware of that actually filed for bankruptcy was the Richmond School District back in 1991. We're not aware of any other school district that's filed for bankruptcy, so it's very rare that would happen.
So what's the difference between bankruptcy and receivership, just so that
Definitely.
we have a clear understanding?
So under a receivership, you would basically, you're receiving a state loan, the county takes over, the board is reduced to advisory role, you lose local control, you have to pay back the loan. So that's basically how a county receivership works. Under a bankruptcy, there's a hierarchy of how you have to pay back funds, anything you owe. So there's some additional restrictions that would apply. But we haven't seen that with the school district, though, recently.
Okay, there's been an issue, or that one of the public commenters brought this up as well, in terms of the data, the assessment of data reliability versus the validity of data. Can you talk about what the difference is in that, why you choose reliability versus validity, and how that changes sort of the net findings and the ones that you base your recommendations on?
So any conclusion, any data that we use in a report to base any of our conclusions, we have to perform procedures to ensure that the data is reasonable, it's reliable, and we could use it to support our conclusions. So every number that we use in our report that we have used to support our conclusions, we perform those procedures. Now, does it take it to the level where it's really precise? No, not necessarily. But we do perform and do enough work to make sure that we're comfortable with the numbers, it supports our conclusions, and that overall trends are accurate. Now, in terms of data validity, you would have to do additional work, almost like a line-by-line review of each individual number, and you have to do additional support in order to validate all the numbers. So that wasn't necessary for this report.
So it wasn't necessary?
Right. So to get to that level of detail, we were able to support it and support the structural deficit and all the other conclusions using the information that we had. So
there are audits that you conduct that you take that extra necessary step to validate the data?
It depends on the scope of the audit, right?
Got it.
Right.
Got it. Okay. Right. Just because it's been an issue that has come up, so I thought it was important to clarify that.
Thank you. I'd like to add to that. So my office, we operate under requirements where we have to follow, they're called GAGAS, but Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards. And those standards require auditors to conduct data reliability if you're going to use information and reach conclusions based on that data. And then you go through that analysis and you determine whether or not you can rely on the data. So one of the examples, for example, staff here, when we're looking at certain information, we're going to take it back to audited financial statements, because we know an audited financial statement is more reliable than an estimate or a projection. But when we're looking at projections, because that's all we have, then you do some reasonableness tests. You compare those years that are projections to prior year actuals and see, is there a huge change? Why is there a huge change? Is there an explanation in the projection why that change why they're projecting a significant increase or a significant decrease. That's where you're not necessarily doing specific validation because you can't validate a projection. But what you can look at is historical information that is valid because it's based on audited financial statements and say, based on that, looking at projections in the future, they seem reasonable. And that's a lot of what staff did. So when we can, and we have actual information, we'll go in and we'll look at it. What Nick is referring to is if we were looking at salaries and wages, we weren't going to go in and look at every single teacher and say, did Elaine Howell get paid $50,000? Did Mr. Kalitzos get paid $60,000? Did Nathan get paid $40,000? We were looking to see in the audited financial statements, does it properly represent, fairly represent the cost of salaries and wages for the district for that particular year? An audit, when an auditor issues an opinion on statements, that auditor is saying this is reflective of the financial situation for this district. So that's how you use audited financials. That's been validated by somebody else who did the financial audit. Then what we're doing is, again, we're doing what we call data analytics and looking at the actual information, comparing it to some of the projections and saying, yeah, this information is reasonable. And then in cases where we had more current information during the course of the audit, we would go back and do another reasonableness check to make sure that when we are making statements in the audit report, it's based on, we have confidence in those numbers that they are reasonable and feasible, but we may not necessarily have looked at every single expenditure that the district had, every single revenue source that the district, where the district received funds. So I hope that explains it a little bit more. But we have that information in our every single audit we issue because of the standards that we're required to follow, so that the users of our audits understand what we did, what we didn't do, to gain confidence in the numbers that we are using in our analyses.
Thank you. Another question is the recommendation relative to the role of the county superintendent, and there seems to be a disagreement in terms of maybe the additional level of authority that a county superintendent has relative to in their role in approving budgets and whatnot. So can you explain a little bit of that back and forth sort of disagreement of opinion? Because I think that's an important clarification as well.
Thank you, Board Member Garcia. Board Member Pritchett, you'll be next.
So as we indicate in our response to the superintendent's response to our audit report, basically the county office superintendent, they have broad authority over fiscal matters of the district. And basically what we did was we lined up our recommendation to line up with providing that additional level of oversight for the district. Now, the county superintendent has broad authority. They have state and rescind authority. They have advisory. They could put someone in an advisory role. And with our recommendations that we have for the district, a lot of them are fiscal in nature. A lot of them are is information that the county office superintendent could follow up on. So we believe that these are all recommendations that is within the authority of the county office superintendent, and it's something that they would be able to implement.
Okay. I do have one last.
Board Member Garcia, just for time purposes, we have two more board members and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Board Member Pritchett.
Thank you. Thank you, President Ryan. Thank you, Ms. Howell and staff for putting together this report. I was intrigued to say the least, and I needed to dive a little bit further in past your report. And so some of the things that I found was, we all know this isn't a new problem, right? And what I found was in 2003, there was a fact-finding report. 2010, there was a grand jury report. 2017, another fact-finding report. 2018, a SCOE review. 2018, a FICMAT report. 2019, a PACE report. 2019, an independent review. And in 2019, your state auditor's report. I have to say, it was literally like the Twilight Zone when I was going through all of these reports. They're up here for anybody who wants to take them and read them. There's literally things in there that when I was reading all the way back from 2003 that sounded exactly like what we're going through today. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It's exactly what we're doing. You know, why are we still talking about the validity of these numbers? I don't get it. Every single one of these reports say that we are in a fiscal crisis, all the way back to 2003. I've been on this board since 2012. We were having the same problems in 2012. You know, it's like, you know, I bring my kid to the doctor. They say, oh, she's got a food allergy. I bring him home, family member says, no, that can't be true. So I take it to another doctor. Take the same test, they said, no, she's got a food allergy. The family member says, no, no food allergy. So I take her back, take another test. The same food allergy comes out on the test. When do we say, oh, that might actually be something? You know, sorry, it's very frustrating. I gotta say that, you know, reading through the grand jury report, I don't know if you guys know that this exists, but if you Google it, it's really easy. You can find it. And some of the quotes are on here. The district faces a financial crisis which presents in its last chance to save itself. However, SCUSD will only survive if everyone involved faces the reality of the present situation and works together. Let me read a couple more of these to you. Plans will fail unless the community first faces its financial problems. The district faces a $30.6 million budget shortfall in 2010 and 2011. 80% of the budget goes towards salary and benefits, and this was in 2010. I checked to see what the attendance was in 2010. It was 44,000 students. We're at 41,000 now, and we're at 91 cents per dollar. SETA's budget cutting proposals are inadequate and unrealistic in relation to the size of the deficit. A continuous unwillingness to modify some contractual agreements will result in the district's bankruptcy. What does it sound like? It's exactly what we're going through now. We have to come together. We cannot wait till March. We are opening our doors saying we will work round the clock. Round the clock. Do it now. You know, I feel sorry for the teachers that are coming up here. I feel bad when they're talking about, you know, the lady who came up here and said she had 3 boys and it was hard for her, you know, to keep a roof over her head. If we continue going down the same path, the kids in the classroom that have no idea how this is affecting them, you should look at them. That's who you should be worried about. March is too late, way too late. And you know what makes me really sad? Is that we had to use valuable state taxpayers' money to say exactly what was in all of these 7 reports that are in front of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Pritchett. Board Member Morowski. Bless you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would echo some of the comments of the public commenters and my board colleagues that I was not surprised by much of or anything that was in the report. But I was really pleased by how clear and comprehensive it was. So I really want to thank you for that work. I think it's just laid out in such a clear way and very visually easy to understand. So I really appreciate that. There are a lot of really solid recommendations in here for our district. And I wanted to understand kind of from your perspective, and if you can give us any guidance as to what the continued relationship between your office and us as the district as an auditee in terms of follow-up, maybe just explain what does that look like? And do you have any suggestions for a framework that we can use to ensure your audit recommendations are followed up on? Because there's many. There's, I don't count them up, but 12 or so different, and some of them are fairly comprehensive. So just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So we actually follow up with the district 60 days, 6 months, and 1 year. The district will be providing a response as to their progress to implementing the recommendation. They're providing us with support to showing that progress. We'll be evaluating that information and posting it on our website on our assessment on whether or not you're making progress or not. Basically, we'll be doing that again 6 months and then in the 1 year period. In terms of like a framework, I mean, basically what we're going to want to see is for each one of these recommendations to coming up with a plan, we want to see the documentation that just says, here's the plan, here's the options that we're presenting, and here's our path moving forward. On some of these recommendations, we might, you may be taking the right steps, but we're going to want to see a little bit more time to see how it plays out a little bit more. I think the key is kind of showing what is your progress of those recommendations, and then just what is the tangible outcomes that are happening.
And do you recommend any particular like mechanism for us as a board to ensure that the district is doing all of the,
Sure.
Like a quarterly report or, just.
So you're always welcome to contact the audit team, me and Nathan, and to talk about here's kind of what we're doing, here's some of the information we're gathering, and then we could definitely talk to the representatives of the district about whether that's on the right track or not.
Okay,
Wonderful.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that kind of ongoing support and collaboration as we all work to get ourselves on a better fiscal path.
So, Member Murawski, I'm sorry. It's been a long day, a big all-staff today, so I've been speaking for hours. One of the examples we could use to share with you, I think what you're asking about is engagement between the board and my office, or the board and the district? Or both?
Basically how us as a board, how we should be doing our oversight duties to ensure these audit requirements or audit recommendations.
Sure, and this is bigger picture, but we did an audit of the University of California, looking at their budget and the Office of the President and how they were preparing their budget. And believe it or not, they didn't have the best reserve policy. They had some weaknesses in their budgeting practices, as esteemed as the university system is. And what they did is they put together, and I don't know if the district has these kinds of resources, you certainly have a CBO who I've been impressed in hearing what I've heard from her, put some groups together, working groups that would prepare materials for the board to look at, to give you sufficient information to really understand, rather than a one-pager. It's like, okay, here's what we intend to do, but here's the mechanics behind how we're doing that. The other thing that the University of California did is they shared information with us. Even though we have our traditional 60 days, 6 month, 1 year, there's a big gap between 60 days and 6 months. 60 days will be, this was issued in December, so it'll be sometime later this month. What we did with the University of California is those groups that we're working on, because there were a lot of recommendations we had to UC, they would provide updates to us more frequently than that. And we would look at that information, and as Mr. Calizzo said, we want as much detail as possible so we can look at it and then provide feedback. Yes, this is heading in the right direction, or no, you are still going to have a problem here. This is not sufficient. We are willing to do that in working with, the district has to do the work, but we certainly can continue to engage. But I think the board should ask for, perhaps quarterly, maybe more frequently than that, updates on what's happening. Basically, have them put a grid together. Here are the recommendations, break them down into specific examples or elements of each of those recommendations, and then what's your action item? When are you going to have that done? What materials are you going to provide to the board to demonstrate that this is going to be an effective change? A change that will, basically implement the recommendation, which hopefully will benefit the district. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of.
Thank you, and I would like to take that as sort of guidance or a request to our superintendent to think about that kind of mechanism for ongoing reporting over the next year.
Yeah.
And I did have a couple other real quick. I appreciate the additional analysis on the kind of the J90 and the salary comparisons. I think that's really an important point to sort of, for us all collectively to get right in terms of making sure we're looking at the right numbers. And I appreciate that distinction with the stipends being excluded, et cetera. So would you be able to share with us any additional analysis that your office has done on that? I think you mentioned that there were some kind of subsequent analysis that you did.
Right.
The numbers?
Mr. Cox reached out to my office and provided us some narrative concerns about what we had in the tables, and then provided some tables that he had put together, similar to what he shared with the board today. And then my staff, I said, let's make sure we look at this, and we responded to Mr. Cox back in early January. But we did just a quick analysis of the 18-19 information. We certainly can share that. I mean, it's a small analysis that we did just looking at that year, because now we have the J90s for that. And that's where we reached the conclusion. We're happy to share that with the board that, again, total compensation
Similar
is the
story.
highest. Same conclusion as we had for prior years where we had the J90 information.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Last question. Is there any way out of our fiscal crisis without significantly lowering our employee compensation?
Well, I think there's a variety of options that we put up here, but no, because I don't think so, because when you're looking at the vast majority of your expenditures, 80% of your expenditures is salaries and benefits. And if you're having to cut significant amounts of money to narrow that structural deficit, or hopefully eliminate that structural deficit, that's an ongoing problem. You have to look at your big picture items, and clearly those are big expense items for the district.
Thank you.
Unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morawski, Board Member Morawski, Ms. Howell. We have a final question from Board Member Garcia.
Yes, thank you. So, channeling Board Member Pritchett's energy, I am extremely frustrated. When I read this report, every time I read it, I've read it multiple times, my blood boils. It is so upsetting that since 2003, we've been hearing the same thing. Same thing from County Superintendent Gordon, from other fact-finding documents, and yet we've done nothing but add to the problem. There was an agreement in 2017, coupled with the skyrocketing special ed costs, coupled with the skyrocketing healthcare costs, that essentially put us over the edge. The agreement should have never been agreed upon. It should have never been approved. One-time dollars should have never been used for an ongoing expenditure. That was irresponsible. And that's what makes my blood boil. And here we are. It was with the intent of not making the hard decisions, which was making cuts, avoiding a strike. Well, guess what? We've done both. We've done both. We've had a strike, and we've laid off teachers and other school staff. And we still have $27 million in a structural deficit, and potentially higher than that. And if it's higher than that, then we run out of money sooner. So because 2 of the 3 findings are tied to the collective bargaining agreement, it's the only way we can get out. It's through a collective bargaining agreement. And I appreciate your recommendations that are inclusive of everyone, because it will have to be a shared sacrifice. Moving forward, our agreements need to be fair for our teachers, our school staff. They need to be fiscally responsible, but more importantly, they need to do right by our students. So I want to thank you for coming here today. And I want to thank you, Board Member Pritchett, for reminding us that this has been long in the making, and that there have been some mistakes made along the way, and we need to own up to them. We need to say we've made a mistake. The intent was to agree on a contract, approve a contract that did right by teachers, but at the end of the day, the district could not afford that contract. And that's it. That's the reality. So what now?
Thank you, Board Member Garcia. I will tell you, in 2003, when FCMAT first wrote of our fiscal challenges, I was in college. I was a product of Sacramento area schools, and it's pretty astonishing to me to think that in 2003, findings that could have put us on a course to financial sustainability were handed to the district and our stakeholders. And yet I look ahead and I worry that if we don't have the courage to take action now, my children will be graduating from high school and will be playing out these same challenges over and over again. I want to really ask you, in closing out this presentation, to reiterate what I've heard you say in several different ways. The data that you used was based on best practice data analytics, audited financial statements, data reliability that supports the structural conclusions, standards required by audits that you have conducted similarly across the state, and have led to a set of recommendations that are viable solutions. Is that your assumption based on the report that you've put together for us?
I don't think I could summarize it any better. Absolutely correct.
So,
Absolutely correct.
Ms. Howell, I want to say to you, with all of that information before us, if we deny the gravity of the circumstance, it is akin to us denying climate change. And I do not want to be the one to tell my 7-year-old and my 9-year-old that I had an opportunity to do what was necessary to ensure that more than 40,000 students had their needs met, and refused to, once again, after 7 audits and a host of reliable information, do the difficult work of digging in to changes that we know we will have to make together, because if we don't, we will fail another generation of students. I want to thank you for your presentation tonight. I want to thank you for your work, and I call upon our board, our community members, and others to take this as a roadmap to financial health moving forward, because if we don't take this as a roadmap, we are doing a disservice to our children, and it is unconscionable.
Thank you, President Ryan. Ms. Howell, I want to just comment and then ask a question, though it's not necessarily, it's not usual for the superintendent to ask questions, but I do want to.
Done. It's okay.
One, I want to commend your team sincerely. They spent countless hours here at the CERNA office. We tried to be as accommodating as possible. And at every single instance of our interaction, not just my interactions, but all of our staff members' interactions with your team, they carried themselves very professionally and certainly represented you and your office in that manner. I wanted to just ask you, in one portion of the audit, your finding was that we have very limited flexibility outside of the negotiations process. And that too has been another finding that perhaps prior to our current governance structure, maybe we weren't as clear about how little flexibility there was, and that perhaps the assumption was that we had a lot of programs that we could fund and were in fact funding, and that to be able to make the cuts necessary from unrestricted general funds, in fact, has not been the case for many, many years in Sac City Unified. Can you, and we've heard this from the county office, we've heard it from other entities. Can you maybe describe, or your team describe, how you came about the conclusion to come up with a finding that that the district's budget structure has very little flexibility outside of the collective bargaining process at the moment?
So one of the first things that we did is we looked at, okay, expenses and revenues, and saw, okay, what's driving the fact that expenses are consistently exceeding revenues year after year. When we look at the budget, we see that 80% of the district's funds are actually going to salaries and benefits. We reviewed various proposals that basically suggested cuts in other areas outside of the collective bargaining process. We found that although some may generate some savings, none of them would actually result in a significant savings that would cover the structural deficit that the district is currently facing. Based on that, then we looked at what other options do you have. You look at you have to adjust salaries and benefits. What do you need to do there? You have to negotiate with your respective unions to come up with a solution. So that's kind of how we got there.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I asked the question only because when individuals ask about what this vision of equity, access, and social justice means, certainly it means that we have to have the will to put a value in the cost to provide opportunities to students, to provide social capital to students. And I think oftentimes there's an assumption that we lack the will to advance that kind of vision because the assumption is that we have the resources and we choose not to do that. And I think that this is a case study in which I think we have a governance structure that is committed to this and unfortunately doesn't have the resources to advance this. So I appreciate, Mr. Briley, when you mentioned that you chose to include districts that look similar to Sac City in terms of the demographics, but have a very different budget structure, because those ought to be the districts that are leading the way in what equity, access, social justice, whatever you call it, ought to look like. Unfortunately, we serve some of the neediest students in this entire region. You look at census data, census tract data, we have the most needy students and families across this entire region, as I get to know it, and I've got to know it in the past 3 years. And how ironic it is that that our budget structure is what's keeping us from advancing those investments in our students. So thank you again.
Thank you, Superintendent Aguilar, and thank you again to the entire team for being with us at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. We appreciate your time and energy, and we hope that it will be a real rallying cry to take action moving forward.
Thank you, members.